Well, good evening. I'm glad that you're here. Some of you wanted to applaud before you ate. I don't know about you, but now would be a really good time to applaud. So for the last several weeks, as many of you know, we have been taking a look at Lent through various lenses. And those lenses are art, music, and food. And so tonight we are obviously at the place where we have now eaten some food, and we're going to have an opportunity to hear about Lent, food, and faith from Christina Johnson. As I mentioned when I partially introduced her a few minutes ago, Christina is a fine dining chef, and as she says, her food reflects both global refinement and hospitality. She, as someone who was raised between this country and her native country of New Zealand, she develops, she says, an early appreciation for diverse ingredients, cultures, and the way that food brings people together. So thank you for bringing us together with food tonight. She did her culinary training at Cordon Bleu, and she also holds an M.B.A. degree. She is married, as I also mentioned earlier, to Chris, who is up here at the front, and with their three daughters, Arlington, Madeline, and Scarlett. Christina, thank you for the food, and we look forward to hearing your reflections on how we can look at Lent through the lens of it. And you can adjust that half a minute.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Thank you to Reverend Hodges and everybody that made this night possible, all the help that I had in the kitchen from the wonderful ladies back there. It was truly humbling, and I was very honored to have been asked to speak on one of my favorite subjects tonight. And I thought, well, if I'm going to speak about food, I probably should cook the food too, because I don't know that you all would take me seriously if I talked about food, but I didn't actually do any of the work myself. So it looks like everybody enjoyed what they had tonight. So very happy with that. That was one thing I can tick off my list that went well tonight. So glad everybody loved it. So, when most people think about Lent, they think about giving something up. I know I did as a child. Lent always came upon the season, and it was, what are you going to give up? Chocolate, coffee, dare I say social media these days. But what we eat during Lent can be just as meaningful as what we give up. In fact, the kinds of foods Christians have eaten during Lent for centuries were intentionally chosen to support reflection, clarity, and spiritual focus. Lent is one of the most reflective seasons in the Christian year. And in the Episcopal tradition, it is a 40-day period leading up to Easter that begins on Ash Wednesday and continues through Holy Week. Those 40 days recall the time Jesus spent fasting in the wilderness and serve as a period of preparation for the celebration of the resurrection. During this season, we are encouraged to slow down and focus on practices such as prayer, repentance, fasting, charity, and spiritual self-examination. These practices create space for deeper reflection and renewed attention to one's spiritual life. And food plays an important but often overlooked role in this process. Historically, Lenten meals were not only about restriction. Instead, they were intentionally simple, balanced, and nourishing. The goal was not to eliminate food, but to keep meals modest enough that they supported the body without becoming the center of attention. Tonight, we'll explore how food functions during Lent in the Episcopal tradition, how simple meals support reflection, and how these ideas connect to one of the most important meals in Christian history, the Last Supper. And along the way, I'll share a few interesting food facts that might surprise you. Food is closely connected to our attention and energy. Heavy or indulgent meals can leave us feeling sluggish. Constant snacking or overly stimulating foods can also distract us. Traditional Lenten meals aimed for a middle ground, foods that were nourishing but simple. Common ingredients included fish, lentils, vegetables, bread, olives, herbs, and olive oil, a few of which we had tonight, if not most of all. They sustain the body while allowing the mind to remain clear and focused. Spiritually, this simplicity shifts our attention away from indulgence and toward gratitude. It also encourages compassion. When meals are modest and intentional, we become more aware of those who struggle to find food at all. So the purpose of Lenten food traditions is not deprivation, it is clarity. Meals support the body so the mind can focus more fully on reflection and spiritual growth. One of the most powerful connections between food and Christian faith is the Last Supper. This meal took place the night before Jesus was crucified. Imagine the scene not as a formal painting, but as a small group of friends gathered around a low table in candlelight. The meal would have been simple: bread, wine, herbs, perhaps lamb. Yet in that ordinary meal, Jesus transformed food into something sacred. During the meal, he shared bread and wine with his disciples and said, "This is my body, this is my blood." This moment became the foundation of the Eucharist, or Holy Communion. And Christians remember Christ's sacrifice through a shared meal. This shows how deeply food is woven into Christian spiritual life. And we will come back to the Last Supper. So meals are not only about nourishment, but they are about community, remembrance, and faith, such as this evening. And before I carry on, I want to just highlight one person in St. Louis. I found this article last week, read about it, and it really touched my heart. It's Peggy Winkowski, known as Grandma Peggy, was named one of the 2026 Women of the Year by USA Today for the powerful way she supports young people in her St. Louis community. 5 years have passed since her grandson Sam started a breakfast club at her home after a disappointing meal at the local diner, where he proclaimed, "My grandma can cook better than this." Tragically, Sam, 15 at the time, was later killed by a drunk driver. But Peggy, however, continued the tradition Sam called the Wednesday Breakfast Club. Each week, kids stream into Peggy's home from Bishop DeBerg High School, where she cooks large breakfasts, often pounds of bacon and dozens of eggs. The meals provide more than food. They create a safe, welcoming space for teens to talk, grieve, and build community. What began as a way to honor her grandson has grown into a meaningful tradition that supports dozens of students every week. These kids continue to come, and alumni of the Breakfast Club visit her often and keep in touch. Peggy didn't grow up with much, but her recognition highlights how simple acts of care and hospitality can have a lasting impact, helping young people feel supported and connected during difficult times. And I thought that was so appropriate for this season of Lent and almsgiving. Food in ancient Mediterranean world was simple. Many people lived on bread, lentils, olives, fish, and fruit, and foods that are nutrient-dense and sustaining. Interestingly, modern nutrition science tells us that these same foods are excellent for brain health, so yay us for having lots of lentils this evening. They provide steady energy, healthy fats, and protein, supporting concentration and mental clarity. So even historically, simple meals supported both physical strength and mental awareness. This aligns beautifully with the spiritual purpose of Lent. Many foods mentioned during Lent carry symbolic meaning as well. Let me ask a quick question. Which of these foods up here do you think is one of the oldest cultivated crops in the world? Julie?
I'm going to say the figs.
Well, actually, it's lentils. Lentils have been cultivated for about 9,000 years. And did you know that our neighbor to the north, Canada, happens to be one of the leading growers of lentils in the world? I was shocked when I read about that. I just don't think of Canada and lentils for some reason. They were inexpensive, filling, nutritious, and because they were so common, they often represent humility and everyday life. Dates were a major source of sweetness long before refined sugar existed. They symbolized hospitality and abundance. Now, has anyone ever done the drive from Southern California to Arizona? Highway 8, perhaps? You know what I'm talking about? So I grew up a little bit in Tucson, Arizona. We lived in San Diego. My sister lived in Yuma, so we traveled that road a lot. And there's one place along the road called Palmdale, where they actually grow many, many dates in the United States. And you can get something called a date shake. So if you're ever on Highway 8 going across from California to Arizona, I definitely recommend stopping and trying a date shake. Fish also carries deep meaning in Christian symbolism. The Greek word ethos became an early Christian symbol representing the phrase, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Several of Jesus' disciples were fishermen, of course, and fish appear frequently in stories about his ministry. Herbs such as mint, dill, and hyssop were used for cooking, medicine, and religious rituals. Bitter herbs were eaten during Passover to remember the suffering of the Israelites in Egypt. Olives were one of the most important crops in the ancient Mediterranean world. They were eaten whole, pressed into oil, and used for cooking, lighting lamps, and religious anointing. The olive branch later became a powerful symbol of peace. These foods remind us that even the simplest ingredients can carry deep meaning. When Christians picture the Last Supper, many imagine the famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci that we saw earlier. In reality, the meal, however, looked quite different. People in first century Judea would have reclined around a low table, probably sitting on blankets or maybe nothing at all. The meal itself was likely connected to Passover, the Jewish festival remembering the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. The foods probably included unleavened bread, wine, lamb, bitter herbs, and fruits like dates or figs. Each of these foods carried symbolic meaning connected to freedom, sacrifice, and remembrance. The Last Supper was not an elaborate feast. It was a simple meal shared among friends. And that simplicity continues to inspire the kinds of meals many Christians choose during Lent. But there is another lesson here that is just as important. The Last Supper reminds us that sharing meals together builds community. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus frequently gathers people around a table. Meals become places where relationships deepen, conversations unfold, and people feel welcomed and included. That idea still matters today. Inviting people into our homes for a meal, even a very simple one, is one of the most meaningful ways we can build relationships and strengthen community. The food doesn't have to be fancy. I'm sure when people come over to my house, they're expecting a Michelin-starred food menu. And sometimes I do deliver, but I would have to say on a regular basis with 3 young children, it's very hard to execute, but I do my best. In fact, the simpler it is, the more it reflects the spirit of the meals we've been talking about tonight. What matters most is the time spent together. Sharing food creates space for conversation, connection, and hospitality, and in many ways, that simple act of gathering around a table reflects the same spirit of fellowship that was present at the Last Supper. So tonight's Lenten meal, we had roasted salmon with garlic braised lentils, roasted carrots with dates, dill, mint, olives, bitter green salad with cucumbers, currants, and radishes, and a chickpea tagine with almonds and apricots. The dinner we're eating tonight reflects many of these traditions. Fish, early Christian symbols of Christ. Lentils, symbols of humility and nourishment for both body and soul. flavors rooted in the Mediterranean world where Christianity began. Fish connects to early Christian symbolism. Vegetables, herbs, and fruit bring natural sweetness and balance. And together these foods nourish the body without overwhelming the senses. One interesting aspect of Lenten food traditions is how closely they align with modern nutrition science. Fish provides omega-3 fatty acids that support concentration. Lentils and chickpeas provide steady energy rather than spikes and crashes. Vegetables and herbs provide antioxidants that support cognitive function. So what early Christians practiced spiritually is something science now confirms. Simple, balanced foods help the brain remain calm, focused, and alert. Food during Lent supports the body so the mind can focus on the deeper questions. Where do we need repentance? Where is God guiding us? And how can we grow spiritually? Although Lent is practiced across many cultures, food traditions share striking similarities. In Italy, no surprise that seafood often replaces meat during Fridays of Lent. In Greece, bean soups and vegetables cooked in olive oil are common. In Ethiopia, many Christians eat vegan meals during fasting periods, including lentils, chickpeas, vegetables, and injera bread. And an interesting historical note comes from Japan. I'm sure you all know what that is in the bowl down there. Any takers? For the record, we did live in Japan for a couple of years. Yes, Arlington.
Tempura shrimp.
Tempura, that's right. But tempura is not really Japanese at all. In fact, it comes from the Portuguese missionaries that included Lenten cooking traditions and eventually influenced the dish we now know today as tempura. I highly recommend going to Portugal. It's a fantastic country. We visited there last summer, and they're known for their sardines, and frying fish is one of the many traditions that they hold. It's kind of like a street food over there. So despite cultural differences, these meals share the same guiding principle. They're simple, nourishing, and sustaining. So 5 surprising things about Lent you may not know. First, Sundays don't count. There are actually, right? There are actually 46 days between Ash Wednesday and Easter, but Sundays are feast days celebrating the resurrection. Second, pretzels were originally a Lenten food. They were invented by monks and shaped to resemble arms folded in prayer. So technically, if you eat pretzels during Lent, you're participating in a medieval monastic tradition. Third, fish on Fridays became common because meat from land animals was avoided during fasting. Fourth, early Lenten fasting rules were much stricter than today. Some Christians avoided meat, dairy, eggs, and oil entirely. And finally, many traditional Lenten foods form the basis of what we now call the Mediterranean diet, which is considered one of the healthiest eating patterns in the world. Pop quiz time. So how can simplifying food help us focus spiritually? Any hands, apart from the table up front? Nobody? Yes, Arlington.
Well, I'm going to take it to her.
Because it has like antioxidants in it that can help your brain focus.
Yeah.
That's right. Eating clean foods that don't weigh your brain down and give you brain fog, yes, can definitely help you focus spiritually. And why do you think Jesus chose a meal as a center of Christian worship? Yeah. Yeah. I feel like host on the Wheel of Fortune.
I think what I always noticed in reading it was always that was a way to naturally bring people together, and it was a way of serving someone and caring for someone. That was what I always thought, or when I looked at it or read it.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said earlier, just the fact of inviting people into your home or gathering even for coffee at Starbucks maybe, just the meal is always there, right? It could be in the background or it could be the forefront of whatever you're doing, but it's always something that you can share together with people. And what foods help you feel physically and mentally grounded? Doesn't have to be something I talked about tonight. Maybe it's coffee. I don't know. I definitely need coffee in the mornings.
He said beer.
Beer. Okay. Well, that's definitely something that's going to relax you, so I would have to agree with that. And how can meals during Lent remind us to care for those who struggle with hunger? Arlington.
Yeah. It can help you because you are fasting and you don't get to eat as much as you did, so it can kind of give you an experience of what people who are homeless or don't really get how much food we get. So you get the whole experience.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously one of the parts of Lent is almsgiving, caring for those in need with compassion, just like Grandma Peggy did with all the kids who she continues today for the Wednesday Breakfast Club. So Lent reminds us that ordinary things like meals can carry deep spiritual meaning. When food is simple and nourishing, it allows the mind to slow down and reflect. Meals become quiet companions in spiritual growth, supporting the body so the mind and spirit can focus on repentance, prayer, and renewal. But Lent also reminds us that meals are meant to be shared. Just as Jesus gathered his disciples around a table, we are invited to gather with others in our own homes and communities. The meal does not have to be elaborate. In fact, some of the most meaningful meals are the simplest ones. What matters most is the act of welcoming others, sitting together, and spending time in conversation and fellowship. Sharing a meal creates space for connection, for listening, and for building relationships. And in many ways, every time we invite someone to our table, we participate in the same spirit of community and hospitality that was present at the Last Supper. As Lent moves towards Easter, these simple practices, reflection, gratitude, and shared meals prepare us for renewal, hope, and celebration. Thank you.
Questions, comments? There's the comments, right?
The kids liked it. That was just great. That was awesome.
It was awesome.
So Christina, say a little bit about, I'm always kind of in awe of people who can put together this type of meal in what seems to be an effortless way. Talk about the preparation for this. How long and what all is involved in putting together something like this?
Sure. Well, it was actually really fun for me to cook for you this evening because one of the last real formal job I had was executive chef to the Dutch Embassy in Washington, D.C. that I did for 3 years. So that was lots of sit-down dinners for, I think we could house about 60 people for a sit-down, but we did a lot of banquets for hundreds of people on a regular basis. And so something like tonight, I never take anything for granted in terms of, what I'm cooking for, how many people I'm cooking for. The same effort and the same preparation goes into every single buffet meal or sit-down dinner that I do. So a lot of it is just coming up with a menu, first and foremost. I wanted to reflect foods that our Lenten foods, but maybe just take them up a notch. And I was a little bit hesitant about maybe serving salmon tonight. I wasn't sure how many people like salmon, but I love salmon. And then when I found out that Reverend Hodges' favorite fish is salmon, I was like, whew. So yeah, I usually start, I did the menu a few weeks ago. I sent Lisa a few different types of menus that we could do for tonight, and this is what she thought would also go well. So yeah, I usually, do the shopping a few days in advance. I like to be pretty well prepared just in case, I need to get more at the last minute or something. And then a lot of it is I work backwards. So I think, okay, what has to be, when does the meal have to be ready? And then I start to work backwards in terms of what really needs preparation done first. Do I have to marinate something? How many hours do I need to do? What kind of fridge space do I need? Is anyone, going to be available to help me? And if not, then I have to start preparations a lot earlier in advance. So, for this meal, I actually did everything today, but but I did shop for it a couple days ago, and I work pretty quickly. It's the old assembly line is the best way to get things done, but I also had some great help in the kitchen, helping me plate things. Yeah, Lisa was she was the feta crumbler extraordinaire tonight. Yeah. She also helped chop the dill for the carrots. Yes, she fluffed the couscous. That's a very important job. So yeah, that's kind of how things happen for a meal like tonight. Yeah.
We get to know some recipes, especially for that, what do we call it? Lentils. Man, those were good.
Those are actually a really easy, I feel like simple is always best. You're always going to get the best meal or recipe when things are not overly complicated. And so, with braised lentils, I started off with dried lentils, and I cooked them for about 20 minutes just in water to kind of soften them, and you kind of, get a little bit of the impurities out of the lentil as well. And then I drain it, and I put in a little bit of butter, but mainly more olive oil, and some sweet onion and garlic. And then I put the lentils back in there. I threw in some bay leaves, and then I used some chicken stock to just kind of slowly cook those. And while those were cooking, I actually was roasting all of the tomatoes in the oven. So the tomatoes had olive oil, oregano, a little bit of garlic, salt, and pepper. And then I put half of those tomatoes when they were done, about 25 minutes or so, into the lentils themselves so that the tomatoes can kind of infuse the lentils with flavor. And then I just turned off the stove and I just kind of let them sit there. I feel like sometimes things like to just kind of, meld together. All the flavors can come together when they have time to sit. Honestly, the tagine, the chickpea tagine and the lentils would probably be better tomorrow even, because it's going to have time to marinate overnight in the refrigerator and all those flavors to really concentrate. But yeah, so that the lentils are an easy thing to make. And the nice thing about a dish like that is that if you don't eat all of them, right, you can freeze that or you can make soup out of it. There's so many versatile things that you could do with a dish like the lentils. And it goes with, so many different foods. You could turn that into, that was more of an Italian inspired because it's got oregano and garlic, but you could turn that into an Indian lentil dish by using a little coconut milk and turmeric and curry powder. So lots of different ways you can change that dish. But yes, I'm happy to provide recipes. They're all in my head, but I will have to write them out. But that's not a problem. Yeah. Yeah.
First of all, that was wonderful. Secondly, you're blessed with a lovely family. I love the way your kids are relaxed around you. I'd like to, with David's permission, leave Lent for a moment. I'd like to hear about a favorite entree at a grand dinner at the embassy that you like to prepare.
Great question. So I get bored very easily. Thank you for the compliment, by the way, before about the dinner. I appreciate that. I get bored very easily, so I never repeated the same menu in all my 3 years there. In fact, my husband will also agree, I have a stack of menu cards that I saved from every single dinner or luncheon that I did at the embassy, because it's always fun to kind of go back and relive the memories, and I can pretty much remember every single meal that I ever prepared there. I was very blessed to work for the ambassador and his wife. I worked at the ambassador's residence, which is located just off of Massachusetts Avenue. The embassy for the Dutch is actually more up in Rock Hill Park, so it's a little bit off the beaten embassy track. So I prepared all the meals for the ambassador and his wife, as well as all of the formal dinners, luncheons, and we probably did about 3 to 4 luncheons and 3 to 4 dinners every week. And then we would also have some, fairly large buffet cocktail parties. I would say probably every 2 to 3 months or so, we would do something like that. So you're asking me about one memorable meal. Well, there is a restaurant in Washington, Virginia called the Inn at Little Washington. Has anyone heard of the Inn at Little Washington? Okay. So I have been lucky enough to go there 2 times. My husband spoils me when it comes to going out. And they have a wonderful cookbook. And one of the dishes that they prepare, not currently, but that they used to do, was a poached lobster tail. And I saw that, and one of my sisters actually alerted me to the recipe, but it just looked so colorful, so beautiful, and I thought, you know what, I need to recreate that for, a menu, a dinner at the embassy. But what it comes with is a concentrated grapefruit heavy cream stock reduction. And you reduce the grapefruit down with everything else until it becomes almost syrupy. You don't add, you do add butter to it at the end, of course, it's French, but you almost don't have to. So it's this gorgeous silky sauce. And then I would gently, of course I had to buy live lobsters, but I would gently poach their tails in a little bit of butter, a little bit of grapefruit juice. I would spoon the sauce onto the plate, put the lobster tail on there, and I would sometimes serve that as a first course instead of a main course. And I would make my own potato chips that I would also put on there. It was a really fun presentation, and I had to have something green. So inevitably I would quickly flash fry a little bit of spinach or something just to pop. Not too much. We don't need too many vegetables with the lobster. But that was definitely one of the main courses. Now, you didn't ask about dessert, but I'm going to tell you, I had this, everybody knows what a ding dong is, right? Okay. So I would make this retro ding dong dessert, and it was a spongy chocolate fudgy cake that I would then layer with homemade marshmallow cream with a salted caramel ganache. And I have made that so many times in so many different versions, and it's absolutely one of my most favorite desserts. But I would serve that in a little cylinder tower, and I would put a little bit of Maldon flaked sea salt on the top, and there was always clean plates. It was very complimentary. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
When are you coming down?
Well, as I said, this is my love language, is cooking for people. I happen to really love the profession that chose me, really, because I do have an undergraduate degree in film and TV. And I did work in LA for a while in television production and film production. I worked on a private airplane for 4.5 years as a chef and flight attendant, but basically catering to Hollywood elite and musicians and politicians and things like that. So many stories, which we can certainly unfold throughout the years to come. But yes, I love doing this, so I would be happy to come back whenever you have me. Yeah. Any other questions besides my own children?
I, for one, would love to have you back only if you bring that dessert.
Definitely doable. Yes. Yeah.
So what is it you basically do now here in St. Louis?
That's a great question. So I always like to have my hand in the culinary landscape in some way, shape, or form. But these days, I have tried to go back a couple of times. I used to work at the Four Seasons as a chef, and they have offered me jobs to go back to the Four Seasons, because that's the great thing about that company. You can really travel with them and go to any property if they have availability. But it's one of those jobs that is holidays, nights, and weekends. And I think at this phase in our life, it just doesn't work with our little family. So I just do like dinner parties for people, I like small functions. I think they're more meaningful and fun. So yeah, dinner parties for people, cooking classes, things of that nature. So yeah, and things like this. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody? No? Okay. But it has to be a serious question.
Okay.
Yeah, what is it?
Will you ever make the bread for us up on the board? Wait, I need an answer.
Okay. Yes, you know that I make sourdough sometimes.
Okay, good.
Okay, quick question? Yes.
I was born in Japan.
Okay. Statement, not a question, but I love it. Okay.
When will you make those ding dongs for me? Because I will eat all of them.
Okay. Yep. No, I will make the ding dong dessert at some point, I promise.
Christina, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And thank you all for being here. We'll have one final segment of this series next Wednesday evening, when we'll be also looking once again at Lent through the lens of art. And our guest is going to be from SLU, from a museum there that focuses on religious art. So I hope to see you then.